The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above us, casting their usual sickly blue tone across the glass walls of the conference room. It was Monday morning, 9:06 a.m., and the company's weekly all-hands meeting had just begun. 12 faces stared at the screen mounted on the far wall, a live dashboard filled with green checkmarks, charts climbing upward, and a blinking status bar that read, "Production stable. 99.98% uptime." Zach leaned forward in his chair, fingers laced, eyes bright. "Well," he said, flashing that relaxed, effortless grin he wore like a custom-fitted suit, "I spent most of the weekend tracing the stack failure. Turns out the issue wasn't where we expected. It was buried in the message queue handler. I rebuilt the logic from scratch, cleaned up the retry mechanism, and rewrote the logging structure. That's what brought production back online around 4 a.m. Sunday." He spoke confidently, deliberately, the kind of voice that made people nod along before they even processed what he was saying. The CTO, a quiet man named Ray who rarely praised anyone publicly, blinked once, then said, "Excellent work, Zach. That's the kind of initiative we need under pressure." There was a ripple of affirming nods. Someone clapped, not sarcastically. My throat tightened, but I didn't say a word. I just sat there, 3 chairs away, staring at the table like it might split open. Zach hadn't fixed the system. I'd spent Friday night buried in log files and metrics until my vision blurred. I'd woken up Saturday at 5 a.m. in a cold sweat, pulled out my laptop, and finally traced the failure path back to a race condition that had been hiding in plain sight. I rewrote the Q processor line by line. I deployed the patch. I ran the test. I restored the system. And now, Zach was taking the credit again. "My name is Emily Tran, and I've been writing code for almost half my life. I'm 31 now, and for the past 8 years I've worked as a senior software engineer in Seattle. First at startups, then at this mid-size firm where I thought things would finally feel balanced. Grown up. Fair. I was wrong about that. My parents came to the US from Vietnam in the early 90s. My mother was a schoolteacher. My father drove buses, then worked his way into municipal tech support by learning networking from library books. We didn't have much, but we always had what we needed, and they made sure I knew that curiosity was worth more than convenience. When I was 13, my uncle gave me a used laptop. On it was a broken copy of Python 2.4, and I became obsessed with making it do things no one else saw value in, scraping music metadata, writing quizzes that scolded you when you got an answer wrong, scripting automated messages to prank my brother. It wasn't elegant, but it was mine. That curiosity became craft. That craft became skill. And by the time I graduated with my degree in computer science, I had built 3 open-source tools, interned at a robotics lab, and taught myself more about distributed systems than some people twice my age. But none of that prepared me for how quiet real theft can be. Not the theft of money. Not even ideas. But credit. The kind that vanishes slowly, like ink fading on the page, until one day you look up and realize someone else's name is etched across your work, and no one remembers that it was yours to begin with. I've always been quiet. Not passive, not weak, just selective. I speak when I have something worth saying. I build what I believe in. I help without needing a spotlight. And until recently, I believed that was enough. That the work would speak for itself. That good work, real work, honest work, would rise. But people like Zach don't need truth to rise. They rise by stepping on the work of others, and making sure no one sees the footprints. Zach Walker had been with the company for just under 9 months, but you'd think he owned the damn place. He had that polished kind of confidence, the kind that walks into a room half a second before he does. His shirts were always pressed, sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms, and a smartwatch. His laptop had stickers from conferences he'd never attended, and his jokes always landed with the exact people you didn't want to disappoint. Before he joined our engineering team, he'd worked in technical consulting, which in Zach's case meant knowing how to sound like he understood systems without ever having to touch the code. He was fluent in buzzwords and perfectly timed silence, and he mastered the subtle art of echoing your ideas just slightly louder, and just one beat later. Zach didn't write much code. He hovered. He lingered around Slack threads, jumped into tickets at the last minute, and volunteered for cross-team coordination whenever a high-visibility project came up. He didn't contribute. He attached himself like a polished shadow. At first I thought it was coincidence. Maybe I was being territorial. Maybe he just had a different style. But then the pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever something was broken, Zach was nowhere to be found. Whenever something was fixed, he was the first to explain how we approached the solution. He'd ask to review your logic, then rephrase it in his own words. He'd slip into final presentations, offering commentary like he'd been part of the build from day one. And because he spoke well, because he smiled at the right moments, because he knew how to say "I" without sounding greedy, people listened. People believed. And me. I just kept doing the work, in silence, while watching my fingerprints disappear from everything I touched. Started with a Slack message. Production alert. Anomaly spike on auth service. Investigating. Just 13 words. No panic. No red flags. But I knew the system well enough to recognize what it meant. Something deep, something brittle, something wrong. By the time I pulled up the logs, there were already over 200 exceptions flooding in. Most of them tied to our background message queue, the system we use to handle password resets, account verifications, anything asynchronous. It wasn't just sluggish. It was failing. And no one else seemed to realize how close we were to a real outage. Zach had replied in the incident thread with, "Maybe it's just a load spike. Let's give it a minute before we escalate." Classic. I didn't wait. I opened a terminal and dove in. For the next 12 hours, I barely moved from my desk. The logs told part of the story, a rare race condition triggered by two handlers writing to the same resource. Something that should never happen, and yet, it was sporadically, but often enough to bring the system to its knees. I spun up a replica environment locally, replicated the behavior, and began isolating variables. At some point I ordered Thai food. It sat untouched on my counter until it went cold. Saturday morning I was still at it, eyes burning, fingers tight from typing. I had rewritten the entire queuing logic, redesigned the failover mechanism, and deployed a patch to staging by sunrise. And when the tests passed, all of them, I sat back in my chair and exhaled for the first time in 16 hours. It wasn't relief. It was exhaustion wrapped in something like pride. Saved the system. Alone. Quietly. No announcement. No speech. I left a detailed write-up in the engineering channel, logged every change in the pull request, and tagged my team lead for final review. I didn't hear from Zach once. Not a thank you. Not a question. Nothing. But Monday morning in the all-hands meeting, I watched him straighten his back, glance at the metrics dashboard, and begin telling a story that wasn't his. "I spent the weekend digging through the queuing logic," he said, leaning casually into the conference room table. "Turns out the issue was deeper than expected. I had to rebuild most of it, but production's healthy now." Morgan, our head of engineering, nodded. Ray, the CTO, smiled. Few people clapped. And I sat 3 chairs away, hands folded in my lap, heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at him, then at my laptop, where the PR history still had my name next to every single commit. And in that moment, that quiet, infuriating moment, I realized, this wasn't the first time Zach had done it. It was just the first time I'd decided to do something about it. I didn't say anything after the meeting. I just walked back to my desk, logged out of the video call, and stared at my screen for a long time. The world outside my window was gray, one of those typical Seattle mornings where the rain doesn't fall, exactly, but floats. My coffee had gone cold. The Slack thread was quiet. And somewhere down the hallway, I could hear Zach's laugh. He was probably telling someone how brutal his weekend fix had been. Probably exaggerating the severity of the bug. Probably already repositioning himself as the hero who saved the company from a near disaster. And no one would question it. Because he looked like the kind of person who got things done. Because I didn't. I thought about the past 9 months. All the times I'd stayed late, refactored broken legacy code that no one else wanted to touch, Written documentation when it wasn't even required. All the features I'd shipped, the performance improvements I'd made, the problems I'd quietly solved behind the scenes. And how often someone else, usually Zach, ended up standing in front of the credit. It was like watching myself disappear in real time. Not because I didn't deserve recognition, but because I didn't fight for it. Because I'd been raised, by my family, by my teachers, by this industry, to believe that if your work was good enough, eventually someone would notice. That someone would speak up for you. That merit would carry its own weight. But that's not how it works. Not really. People don't reward the best work. They reward the best story. And Zach was a storyteller. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was something colder. Something quieter. A kind of betrayal that didn't sting so much as settle. Deep under the ribs, like a slow leak of pressure in your chest. Because I knew I couldn't go to HR. There was no rule against what he did. He didn't plagiarize. He didn't lie. He just took up space. Just enough to crowd me out of the frame. And maybe that was my fault. Maybe I'd let him. Maybe I had been too silent, too humble, too trusting that the code, the truth, would be enough. But I also knew something else. Zach wasn't the only one who could tell a story. Mine would be quieter. But it would be undeniable. That night I didn't go home right after work. I stayed late. Not out of duty or pressure or some compulsive need to be the last light on in the office. I stayed because something in me had shifted. I wasn't going to confront Zach. I wasn't going to make noise. I was going to make a record. My revenge wouldn't come through outrage or escalation. It would come through architecture, clean, traceable, impossible to argue with. I started by exporting the entire Git history of the fix I'd pushed that weekend. Every commit, every diff, every line I'd rewritten, every comment I'd left for clarity. I made backups on my personal encrypted drive. Not because I planned to leak anything, I'm not reckless, but because I knew the first step to being erased is trusting that your name will stay attached to your work. Then I went back through the Slack logs and took screenshots of the original investigation thread, the one Zach barely participated in. I documented my analysis, the timeline, the environment configs I'd posted, the deployment notes I'd written. Everything was time-stamped, everything clean. Over the next few days, I began laying a new foundation, quiet and deliberate. I proposed a new internal system, a weekly engineering digest, a simple document summarizing key technical changes and performance metrics to be shared with leadership and clients. I volunteered to write it. No one objected. Each summary included a high-level explanation of any major fixes, who contributed, what changed, and why it mattered. I wrote clearly, not defensively, just factually. And each time I published it, I CC'd Morgan, our engineering director, the tech leads, and anyone even remotely connected to the affected product lines. In the very first digest, under critical fixes, I wrote, Emily Tran, identified and resolved asynchronous queue handler bug, CPR number 3482, restoring system stability after 212 anomalies in auth service. Refactored retry logic, implemented structured logging, and added performance testing for validation. I didn't mention Zach, because he hadn't touched a single line of it. He noticed. He didn't say anything to me directly, but I could feel his presence in the revision threads. The way he hovered over comments without replying. The way he started tagging other engineers in unrelated discussions, trying to look involved. For the first time, he wasn't ahead of the narrative. He was behind it, chasing it, exactly where I wanted him. By the third weekly digest, the tone of our team meetings had changed, subtly but unmistakably. When Morgan asked for progress updates, eyes turned toward me. When questions about system stability came up, people looked at the reports I had authored, not the speculative comments Zach threw into Slack 10 minutes before the call. I never once raised my voice. Never accused him. Never even referenced the past. I simply continued documenting, delivering, and letting the record stand. And in a world of vague memory and fast-moving projects, nothing speaks louder than a clean paper trail. Zach began trying harder, but not in the way that mattered. He started CCing more people on emails that didn't need them. He started using phrases like team effort and we brainstormed this in meetings that I wasn't part of. He even pushed a pull request with a minor cosmetic change to a dashboard and titled it, New Performance Layer Fixes. It wasn't a fix. It was a font update. But I said nothing. Because I didn't need to say anything. When the engineering leads reviewed the diff, they left polite thumbs up emojis. And no comments. And in that silence, I could hear it happening. Zach was losing traction. The real turning point came during a stakeholder review. One of our most important internal clients, the data science team, requested a walkthrough of the new infrastructure we'd rolled out to fix the message queue bottlenecks. Morgan asked me to lead the session. Said yes calmly. And I prepared like it was a product launch. I built a clean slide deck that showed before and after metrics. Latency drops. Error suppression. Throughput gains. I annotated the architecture diagram with labeled handlers and timestamps from the Git logs. And when I presented it, to 12 people on a Zoom call including 2 VPs, I didn't rush. I didn't over-explain. I didn't hedge. I just told the truth, clearly and precisely. When I finished there was a pause. Then one of the VPs said, "Emily, that was probably the clearest technical explanation I've seen in months. Excellent work. And this change. This is the reason our reporting has stabilized, correct?" Morgan nodded. "That's right. All credit to Emily for catching it, fixing it, and documenting it cleanly." Zach was on the call. Muted. Camera off. He said nothing. It happened during sprint review, a routine Friday call that suddenly didn't feel routine at all. We were halfway through the agenda, reviewing system tickets and progress on upcoming features, when Morgan paused on a slide labeled, Post-mortem. Auth service incident resolution. She cleared her throat slightly. "We've already stabilized the queue system," she said, "but I wanted to walk through how we got there, and clarify contributions, just to make sure everything is accurately recorded for leadership." The room went quiet. No one said a word, but I felt the stillness in my jaw, in my fingertips on the trackpad. I knew what was coming. And so did Zach. Morgan clicked to the next slide. A clean timeline, color-coded. For key events. For names. One of them in bold, Emily Tran. She began narrating. Initial anomaly detection, Emily. First documented PR on QLogic, Emily. Refactor and deployment, Emily. Post-deployment testing and metrics, Emily. Client comms, Zach, after resolution was complete. She wasn't accusatory. She didn't raise her voice or single him out. She just said it plainly. Factually. Completely. Zach tried to recover, poorly. He leaned toward the mic and offered a quiet chuckle, then said, "Yeah, obviously Emily did a lot of the technical lifting. I just helped coordinate things toward the end. But the damage was done. And no one responded. Not because they were angry, but because they already knew. They'd seen the reports. They'd read the commits. They'd watched the architecture presentation. The record had already spoken. And for once, Zach wasn't ahead of it. After the meeting, I got a message from one of the senior infrastructure engineers. That was long overdue. Quiet strength wins. Well done. Another engineer I barely knew added a clapping emoji under my PR from the original fix. 2 weeks late, but right on time. And Zach. He didn't message me. He didn't look at me. He started turning his camera off in every team call after that. The shift wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion, no demotion, no public shaming. Just absence. His voice faded. His Slack presence quieted. His influence dissolved. The following week, Zach was reassigned. There was no memo. No formal announcement. Just a quiet change on the engineering org chart, a reshuffling of responsibilities, and a calendar invite from Morgan titled, New Team Structure. Transition Planning. When I joined the Zoom call, Zach was already there, eyes dull, voice clipped. Morgan didn't mention the post-mortem. She didn't need to. She simply said that Zach would be moving to a new internal tooling initiative, Lower stakes, less client-facing, more process-focused. It was a demotion in everything but title. He nodded, forced a smile, and said something about new challenges. I just listened. I didn't gloat. Didn't even feel triumphant. Because the truth is, it wasn't satisfying in the way revenge stories usually are. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was surgical, clean, inevitable, and that was enough. After that, things shifted, gradually, then all at once. People began tagging me on infrastructure discussions without hesitation. Morgan started looping me into early planning stages instead of handing me finalized specs. And when a client asked for a technical deep dive session, she recommended me directly. I wasn't promoted. Not officially. But the work I was given, and the space I was given to lead, said more than any title could. One afternoon, Ray, our CTO, stopped by my desk. Virtually, of course, just to say, "I've been reading your digests. Thoughtful stuff. If you ever want to propose architectural shifts beyond just patchwork, let me know. You think like a systems person." It was one sentence. But it rewrote months of silence. Zach didn't leave the company. He just faded. Still in meetings, still smiling, still offering alignment, but no longer at the center of anything that mattered. He didn't steal credit anymore. He couldn't. 'Cause now, everything had a signature. Some victories don't come with fireworks. They come with stillness. A kind of settled quiet where no one's clapping, no one's watching, but you know something has changed. Not out there. Inside. That's how it felt, sitting at my desk 2 weeks after the post-mortem meeting, preparing for a call with a new client who'd specifically asked for me to lead their systems review. Not the team. Not whoever worked on the last patch. Me. The same engineer who had once been spoken over in every meeting. The same woman who had stayed late, documented everything, and watched someone else smile while taking the bow. The same person who had spent years hoping good work would be noticed without needing to fight for it. But now the work spoke. And the silence was gone. I never confronted Zach. Never cornered him. Never said, "You took that from me." Because in the end, I didn't need to. The truth was in the logs. In the reports. In the architecture diagrams. In the eyes of people who finally started seeing clearly. Zach didn't fall because I pushed. He fell because there was nothing left beneath him once I stopped holding the foundation in place. Some people code for recognition. Some code for control. I've always coded for clarity, clean logic, solid systems, no ambiguity. But now I see something else. Clarity isn't just in the code. It's in the way you carry yourself. It's in how you document the truth when no one's looking. It's in the calm refusal to let someone else write your story. And maybe the world doesn't always reward quiet integrity right away. But eventually it stops rewarding the noise. As I joined the client call that day, my name alone on the calendar invite, I smiled. Just a little. Because I knew what they didn't yet. What Zach never understood. Sometimes the cleanest code doesn't just fix the system. It rewrites it.